Have you ever sat across from someone at dinner, the plate still warm, the conversation easy, and watched them insist on paying the bill before you even reached for your wallet? And in that moment, you felt something you couldn't quite name, something closer to a small, quiet pressure in your chest. You smiled. You said thank you. And yet the whole drive home, something felt off. Here's what's strange about that feeling. We're taught from childhood that generosity is one of the purest things a person can offer. Someone who gives freely, who always shows up, who never seems to keep score, that person is supposed to be safe, trustworthy, good. So when you feel uneasy around them, your first instinct is to blame yourself. Maybe you're too cynical. Maybe you don't know how to just accept kindness. But Nietzsche had a different read on this entirely. He believed that among all the masks a person can wear in social life, performed virtue is the most difficult to see through because it looks exactly like the real thing. And the most sophisticated version of performed virtue is covert dominance generosity. Giving, not as an act of love, but as a quiet way of placing yourself above someone. Today we're going to look at 6 specific behaviors that reveal when generosity is actually a control strategy. And I want you to stay with me until the very end, because the final one is the most disorienting of all. Not because it describes someone you know, but because it might describe you. Each behavior is a clue. We're not going to hand you the verdict up front. We're going to let the picture build, piece by piece, until something clicks. So let's start with the first clue. It looks completely harmless. In fact, it looks like the most natural thing in the world. If this kind of content makes you think differently about the people around you, subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from. The first clue is so ordinary, it almost disappears. Think about someone in your life who gives a lot. Maybe they're always the one offering to drive, always the first to lend a hand when you're moving apartments, or overwhelmed at work, or going through something hard. On the surface, and I mean this, they look like one of the good ones. Generous, steady, reliable. But then something shifts. It might be months later. You disagree about something, or you say no to a favor, or you simply have a bad week and aren't as available as usual. And then, in the middle of an ordinary conversation, it surfaces. They say something like, I've always been there for you. I just thought that counted for something. Or maybe more quietly, after everything, I just expected a little more consideration. And there it is. The invisible favor ledger, cracked open just enough for you to see it. Here's what's actually happening beneath that moment. Social psychologists who study dominance behavior have documented this pattern clearly. When giving is strategic, each act of generosity functions less like a gift and more like a deposit. The giver isn't building connection, they're building credit. And credit, eventually, gets spent. Nietzsche saw this clearly. He wrote that many acts we call generous are, at their core, a disguised form of the will to power. The gift that comes with a hidden price tag isn't charity. It's leverage wearing the costume of love. The cruelest part? You're not supposed to feel the ledger until it's used against you. Until that moment, everything feels warm, everything feels safe, and that warmth is real, which is exactly what makes the reversal so disorienting. This is the foundation the whole pattern is built on. Once you understand that some giving is really just quiet accounting, the next behavior starts to make a lot more sense, because this one happens in public, and the audience is never you. So the first clue was about private accounting. Favors quietly tallied, debts quietly stored. The second clue operates completely differently. It doesn't hide at all. In fact, it puts itself right in the center of the room. Picture this. Someone at work organizes a collection for a colleague going through a tough time. They send the group message, they coordinate the card, they handle everything, and genuinely, that's a good thing. But then, in the next team meeting, unprompted, they mention it. Just to make sure the room knows they were the one who made it happen. I just felt like someone had to step up, they say, glancing around just long enough to register who's nodding. That glance, that's the tell. True generosity, the kind that actually serves the other person, doesn't need a witness. Research into social behavior has shown consistently that publicly visible acts of giving do something specific in a group. They establish a quiet moral hierarchy. The giver rises. The receivers, by contrast, are implicitly placed below. It's a ranking system dressed in the language of care. This is what makes the approval-seeking performance so hard to call out. Because the act itself was real, the colleague did get helped. But the social transaction happening alongside it, that's a different thing entirely. The giving was the method. The audience was the point. Nietzsche was sharp about this. He argued that those who most loudly advertise their virtue are often compensating for something they can't find quietly inside themselves. The announcement isn't generosity overflowing. It's a need, raw and urgent, to be seen as good, because being good in private doesn't feel like enough. And here's what's worth sitting with. The person doing this often doesn't know they're doing it. The impulse feels genuine, the warmth feels real, which makes this clue much harder to read than the first one. But the third clue? The third one hides inside a compliment. And it might be the most elegant disguise of all, a compliment that cuts. That's what we're looking at now. On the surface, this one is the hardest to spot, because it arrives wearing the exact same face as genuine praise. Someone hears your good news. Maybe you got a promotion, finished something you'd been working on for months, or finally pulled off something you'd been nervous about. And they smile, they lean in, and they say, "Honestly, I had no idea you could do something like that." Or, "That's incredible. I mean, nobody really saw that coming, did they?" You feel a small flush of warmth. And then, a few seconds later, something else. A faint deflation you can't quite explain. Here's what just happened. The compliment was real, but so was the message hidden inside it. The subtext of, "I didn't think you had it in you," is not encouragement. It's a quiet communication that your starting point was low, your ceiling was uncertain, and the speaker has been quietly tracking both. What looks generous on the surface is actually a positioning move. They rise by naming how far you had to climb. Nietzsche called this kind of thing ressentiment, a French word he borrowed deliberately because he thought it described something too specific for ordinary language. It's the resentment of someone who can't compete openly, so they compete through the framing of their praise. They give you the compliment with one hand, and with the other, they set the ceiling of what they expected from you. Both things happen in the same sentence. The tricky part is that you can't call it out without sounding defensive. That's the elegance of it. Say, "That felt like an insult," and you look like someone who can't accept a compliment. Say nothing, and the framing sticks. We've covered hidden debt, public performance, and now language used as a soft blade. 3 clues in, and they all share one quality. When things are going well, this behavior stays invisible. What happens when things stop going well is a different story entirely. When things go well, the pattern stays hidden. The giving flows, the compliments land, the warmth feels real. But apply a little pressure, a disagreement, a moment of need that's actually costly, a situation where loyalty has a price, and the fourth clue reveals itself almost immediately. This is the one about disappearing, not loudly, not with a fight or a door slamming. The person who uses giving as leverage tends to exit very gracefully when the cost of staying rises. You're going through something genuinely hard, and you need someone to stand beside you when it's not comfortable. You need them to say, "I'm with you on this," even when the room is divided. And instead you hear, "I totally get where you're coming from, but I think both sides have a point here." Or, I care about you. I just can't really get involved in this one." It sounds reasonable. It sounds measured, even kind. But notice what just happened. The moment the conditional warmth was actually tested, it folded. Here's what this reveals about the whole dynamic. Giving that comes with an implicit score, which we looked at earlier, only makes sense as a strategy if the giver retains the ability to withdraw. That's the leverage. A truly unconditional relationship can't be used as a bargaining chip because it doesn't have exit conditions. But a strategic one always does. It was calibrated, extended when the return was clear, quietly retracted when it wasn't. Nietzsche believed that what a person does in the moment of inconvenience tells you everything their comfortable moments conceal. Generosity in easy times costs almost nothing. What someone does when staying loyal actually costs them something. That's the real data. And yet this behavior, as painful as it is to experience, is still something you can recognize from the outside. You feel the temperature drop. You notice the absence. The fifth clue is more intimate than that. It gets inside the relationship, and it uses your own gratitude as the mechanism. Gratitude is a beautiful thing. It's one of the most human responses we have, that genuine warmth you feel towards someone who showed up for you. But the fifth clue is about what happens when someone learns to cultivate your gratitude the way a gardener tends a crop. Patiently, deliberately, with a harvest in mind. This person gives a lot. Over time, genuinely a lot. And they remind you of it, not aggressively, not all at once, but in small doses, woven into ordinary conversation. I've always made you a priority, even when things were hard for me too. Or, when tension surfaces, I just feel like, given everything I've put into this, I deserve a little more understanding here. Notice the architecture of that sentence. It constructs an obligation. The history of their giving is being used, in real time, to shrink your freedom to say no, to disagree, to simply feel differently than they'd like you to feel. This is where the strategy becomes something close to emotional architecture. The giving wasn't just generous impulse accumulated over time. It was material, gathered and stored, to be used later as the walls of a room you didn't realize you were being slowly moved into. And once you're inside it, every exit feels like ingratitude. Nietzsche had a word for the moral system built on this kind of suffering as currency. He called it the morality of pity, and he was deeply suspicious of it. Not because he didn't believe in care, but because he recognized how easily the language of sacrifice could be used to install a sense of permanent debt in the person being helped. The martyr and the manipulator, he suggested, sometimes wear the exact same face. What makes this clue so hard to name is that the giving was real, the sacrifice was real, the exhaustion was probably real too. But a gift given while keeping the receipt is something else. And the sixth clue? It doesn't happen between two people. It happens in front of a whole room. So the fifth clue operated in private, between two people, in the quiet accumulation of debt. The sixth one scales up. It needs a room. Picture someone in your social circle who gives visibly, consistently, and with a kind of effortless grace. They organize things. They volunteer first. They're the one who remembers birthdays, covers for colleagues, checks in on people going through hard times. And from a distance, honestly, they look like exactly the kind of person you'd want around. But spend enough time watching, and you notice something. Their generosity doesn't just flow outward, it reflects back. Every act of giving contains a silent comparison. I'm the one who actually showed up, or offered lightly at a gathering. I just think if you're able to help, you really should. It's not that hard, you know. And then, almost as an afterthought, I mean, that's just how I'm wired. That last phrase, that's the tell. When someone converts their generosity from a behavior into a personality claim, that's just who I am. They stop describing an action and start asserting a rank. What they are really saying is, this is my identity, and by extension, it is not yours. Their giving has become a measuring stick, and everyone nearby is implicitly being measured. Nietzsche was blunt about this dynamic. He argued that when virtue becomes a public identity rather than a private practice, it has crossed into something closer to domination. The person on the moral high ground didn't climb there to help anyone. They climbed there to look down, gently, warmly, with a generous smile on their face. This is the most socially polished form the whole pattern takes. It's the version that gets praised, admired, even rewarded, which makes it the hardest to question without looking like the problem yourself. 6 clues, and we promised you the list was finished. But there's one more thing, and it's not about someone else at all. We said we'd get there, and we will. Here's the bonus, and we promised it would be the most uncomfortable one, because it doesn't describe someone across the room. It describes the face in the mirror. Think about the last time you did something genuinely kind for someone. Maybe you helped a friend through something difficult, or quietly covered something for a colleague, or showed up for someone who was struggling. Now ask yourself, honestly, without judgment, did you tell anyone about it? Did you feel a small pull to mention it, even casually? Did the good feeling get just a little bit bigger once someone else knew? If the answer is yes, that's not a character flaw. That's the human condition, but it is worth sitting with. Because here's what Nietzsche noticed, and this is arguably his sharpest observation on the whole subject. The impulse to perform goodness often has nothing to do with the other person. It has to do with a quiet, persistent internal discomfort. A need to see yourself as someone who gives, someone who cares, someone who shows up. And when that internal image feels shaky, when you're not sure you're measuring up to your own standard of who you're supposed to be, giving becomes a way to stabilize it. You're not helping them, you're reassuring yourself. And you need a witness, because your own knowledge of the act doesn't quite feel like enough. The vignette here isn't dramatic, it's ordinary. It sounds like, I actually went out of my way to help him with that. He doesn't even know how much I did behind the scenes. Said softly, maybe just to one trusted friend. Not boasting, just needing the act to be seen. Nietzsche would say, the moment the good deed needs an audience to feel complete, it has shifted its center of gravity. It is no longer about the recipient. It is about the story you tell yourself about who you are. And that, right there, is the quietest form this whole pattern takes. Which makes what comes next the real question. Not, is someone doing this to me, but something harder. So what does the real thing actually look like? Because here's the risk with everything we've just walked through. You start seeing the pattern everywhere. The person who helped you move last spring, were they keeping score? The colleague who praised your work, was there a knife in it? It becomes easy to look at every act of giving with suspicion, and that's just a different kind of distortion. So let's be precise about what genuine generosity actually feels like, from the inside and the outside. It feels light. Not in a trivial way, sometimes it costs something real, but the person doing it doesn't carry it afterward. They don't need you to know how much it cost them. They don't reference it later when the relationship gets complicated. They give, and then they let it go. Completely, the way you'd let go of a breath. You can feel this difference in your body, honestly. Think about someone who's helped you, where you walked away feeling genuinely free. Grateful, yes, but unencumbered. No weight of obligation sitting in your chest. No quiet sense that the favor is just waiting to be called in. That feeling, that lightness, is the signal. Real giving doesn't install anything in you. It just adds something and leaves. And on the giving side, it looks like this. You do something good, and the satisfaction is complete in the act itself. You don't find yourself hoping someone saw. You don't feel a pull to mention it. The good feeling doesn't depend on being registered. Nietzsche's standard here was demanding but clear. He believed that authentic strength, the kind rooted in genuine self-worth, has no need for external confirmation. The person who gives from that place doesn't require your gratitude to feel good about themselves. They already do. That's the contrast. 6 behaviors, 1 bonus, and now a picture of what sits on the other side. But knowing the difference is one thing. What you actually do with it, in the relationships you're already inside, that's what we'll leave you with. So here's the question we promised. Not, is someone doing this to me? That one's actually the easier question. And by now, you probably have a face or two in mind. The harder question is this. Where in your own giving do you feel a faint need for the act to be witnessed, just noticed? Where does your generosity carry a quiet hope that it lands on the right person's radar? It's a reason to look more closely at what you're giving for. Because the deepest insight in everything we've covered today is about something Nietzsche kept circling back to across his whole body of work, the question of whether your inner life needs external scaffolding to hold its shape. Whether the good you do feels real without a witness to confirm it. And here's the concrete thing, the image that stays with me from all of this. Imagine handing someone something they genuinely need and then walking away before they can thank you, just leaving the room. No glance back to see the expression on their face, no mention of it later. That small act, That willingness to let the giving disappear into the other person completely is what it actually feels like when there's no ledger running, when the warmth isn't conditional on being returned. Most of us can only do that some of the time, and that's honest. But knowing the difference between those moments and the ones where you're quietly hoping for a receipt, that knowledge changes something, slowly, in the right direction. The room gets quieter, the giving gets lighter, and what's left feels, finally, like the real thing. If something in this video made you pause and look inward, type the word freely in the comments. Just that one word. You'll know why.